My name is Michael Adams, and I'm president of the Nebraska World Affairs Council. I'm happy to welcome all of you to today's webinar, which I think you'll find fascinating. The way we'll work here is I'll say a few words about who our organization is, what it is. We're very happy to also welcome the Bread Breakers group and today's presentation. And I'll just give Gary a minute to make an announcement.
I am president of B'nai B'rith Bread Breakers, which is a weekly speakers group, meets every Wednesday, approximately noon to 1. We have had, for example, as speakers, every sitting governor, mayor, representative from the 2nd Congressional District. We've had scientists, we've had news reporters. We have what I like to call the interesting and the influential, the eminent and the preeminent. Anyway, if you'd like to get on our email list and join us, there's no charge, it's free. Just email me at gary.javich, and the spelling is correct up there, gary.javich@gmail.com. Our next speaker Wednesday is Luann Linehan. She is a senator at the unicameral, and she was responsible for chairing the committee that redistricted the state of Nebraska. So whether you're happy or not, you could ask her any question you want. We always have questions and answers. Thank you very much, Michael.
Okay, so today's presentation is global energy, past, present, and uncertain future. We have some, important deadlines coming up in the next 10 to 25 years, and it's going to be a challenge to figure out how to get there. The speaker is Professor Bing Chen, and I'll just say a few words here about our organization, which is the Nebraska World Affairs Council, which we affectionately call NEWAC. And then I'll hand it off to my colleague, Betty Chen, who will introduce today's speaker. The Nebraska World Affairs Council was established in 1972. So if you do the math, you'll realize that 2022 is going to be our 50th anniversary. So we're pretty excited about that. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization, and our mission is to provide educational programs and engagement opportunities together with a number of partners to our targeted sectors, which are students, young professionals, and also community leaders, so that they may become competent, informed global citizens in this very complex, interconnected world that we all live in. We encourage very much citizen-to-citizen diplomacy as a way to promote peace and mutual respect so that we may all thrive. People sometimes ask me, well, why do Nebraskans care about world affairs? Well, as you may know, the state sends home annual surveys with students, and the results of those are pretty interesting when they come back. One of the questions is, what language do you speak at home? And the survey indicated there are more than 120 languages spoken in the homes of Nebraska students. Wow, who knew? Nebraska is a rural state, as we all know, and ranks, I believe, 37th in terms of population in the US, but it ranks first, second, third, or fourth in a number of export categories, especially ag-related. In fact, exports provide about 62,000 jobs in the state and represent 9% of Nebraska's economy. So awareness of world affairs is important here. Our programs cover a wide range of world affairs topics, including things like food security, conflict resolution, climate issues, US foreign policy, human rights, international trade, cultural heritage, international education, just to mention a few, but you get the idea. So I invite all of you to follow us on Facebook and Instagram and learn more about our programs and events. Global citizens are needed here, so please consider joining us. I'm now happy to hand over the introduction of the speaker to my colleague, Betty Chen.
Thank you, Michael. And also thank you, Gary, for joining us. Today, as you know, our featured speaker is Dr. Bing Chen. He's a professor of electrical and computer engineering at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. His topic today is global energy, past, present, and the uncertain future. What will a clean energy future look like in 2030, 2050, and beyond? How do we get here? How disruptive will the transformation be? What are the highest priority industry sectors to decarbonize in a world of 10 billion people by 2050? You will learn all about the amazing energy innovations happening right now, globally, and also here in Nebraska. Bing Chen has been working in renewable energy since the mid-1970s at the University of Nebraska Passive Solar Research Group. His first project was a collaboration with the Los Alamos Scientific Laboratories to test the feasibility of the passive solar energy for the upper Midwest. With a modest $1,000 grant, engineering students and faculty combined their efforts to build 4 test buildings in 1978, where testing proved that passive solar energy was a viable solution for Nebraska. He has gone on to work on passive cooling technology. His most recent effort has been to address both the climate issues with a need to reach carbon zero within the next generation and seeking an improved solution for senior housing that ADA compliant in the rapid growing small houses movement that has become established on the West Coast. With the goal of carbon, electrical, and water zero, the SSH has the potential for being a disruptive technology and has been likened to a small house of steroids. And now it is my pleasure to introduce my good friend, Dr. Bing Chen, to talk about the fascinating topic, global energy. Take it away, Bing.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to insert one comment, Bing. If you have questions, please enter them in the chat room. And after the presentation, we'll have 10 or 15 minutes of Q&A. And I should also mention this is being recorded and we will post it later on the Nebraska World Affairs YouTube channel. So thanks very much, Bing.
All right, my pleasure, Michael. And I welcome, I have many friends at the Jewish Community Center. So you could give my best regards, Joel, to the Grossman family. Alex was a former student of mine, and I have had a chance to visit with them on solarizing the Jewish Community Center here in Omaha at one time or another. It's difficult to cover a topic such as this, going into the past, to the present, and the future, in the space of about 40 minutes, considering that these are topics that consume approximately 45 weeks of my course sequences. And so I've done my best to really edit this down even since yesterday. So hold on to your seats. We're going to, particularly the uncertain future part, I'm going to probably explore some, what you might say, far out ideas. And I say that almost literally. So hold on, and I hope you enjoy the ride and find it stimulating. So let me come over here. Can everybody see this? The shared screen? Okay. So here's some of the, you might say, an outline of some of the topics that we're going to have today. And so basically the past, the present status of energy, and the future. And you can read that.
There, good.
So this is the first slide, and of course I like this one because it shows you might say a renewable future and somewhat evocative of the plains here in Nebraska. And so here's an outline, you might say, of today's Chautauqua, looking at past, present, and future strategies, and a little bit of details. We basically have 9 years before the end of this decade of the 20s. And in a way, evocative of last century, the roaring 20s. In this case, hopefully the renewable strategies which are coming to fruition, as well as some of the more longer term things that I've been listening to for 30 years, like nuclear fusion, will take some time to get done. So just Betty kind of introduced me. I'm kind of the living fossil here at the University of Nebraska. I've been involved in exposure, how did I get involved with energy, and my interest in a certain Nebraska author. And as working as a fresh electrical engineer, I spent a summer at the Naval Weapons Center in China Lake, California. And the project that I was assigned finally was one dealing with a manned and bottom base to be located on the continental shelves. And so part of that study, I wanted to say, well, what reasons do we have for being 1,000 feet or so beneath the ocean in a manned habitat? So as part of that study, I wanted to see what are the ocean's resources and what was the global situation. So if you, let's see if I can get my carrot. This is where I was at that time. Can you see the carrot stick there? So
Yes.
for 1967, I was looking at this piece of data right here on the carbon dioxide levels on Mauna Loa. And I remember going to talk to a number of the climatic scientists at the Naval Weapons Center and asking the scientists, is this natural or is this something that is human-made? And they suspected that this could be human-caused. And the 320 parts per million concerned me because going even further back geologically in the time, I had seen that the values of carbon dioxide did vary. My talk is not on carbon dioxide. That's again in my sequence of 2 courses. But I mention it because there is a direct correlation with energy, which is my topic for this morning and afternoon. Another discovery I made that summer was the realization that there are metallic nodules on the surface of the seabeds. And I was very curious about them. Do they have a certain a value, commercial value? And the other thing I discovered was something that are called methylates. Methylates are basically you might say, a slushy. A slushy, however, something you don't want to drink because it's methane based. And I remember talking to the scientists. I said, well, what do you think about these methylates? And they said, Bing, as long as the temperature stays close to 33 degrees or less, we have nothing to fear. However, heaven help us if the ocean temperatures should rise. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And it was something that I thought, well, probably bears watching in the years ahead. I didn't think much of it at the time, only that I noted that this was occurring. So here are these twin processes. These will both contribute to our talk this afternoon, I guess now, as we go forward. The other thing I discovered was Loren Eiseley, who was, in essence, he himself was discovered by the California author Raymond Bradbury, who everybody is probably familiar with. And over the decades, I've gotten to know Ray pretty well. And this is one of from his invisible pyramid. He basically was concerned about mankind's presence on planet Earth. And he basically describes us as a slime mode organism or analogous to one in the way that we have treated this planet. And I remember talking to Ray, well, do you agree with what Eiseley says? He says, well, Bing, I discovered him and encouraged him to write more. And that's why you know Loren Eiseley today. And I thought, okay, I know where you stand. In essence, the energy ladder has grown so steeply over the last 3 centuries as to be basically what is called in my profession an impulse function. Eiseley, of course, says it much more poetically. The other thing that drove me after that summer in California was to begin to look at what sector can I affect in the energy sector. And I deliberately chose the field of renewable energy, and application is to residential structures. And I said, I'm not going to solve the world's energy problems, but perhaps I can address one of them in a way that will be beneficial. Passive solar energy, with the passing of the Arab oil embargo, was very popular in Nebraska, particularly in the early 80s, as a result of the book that we wrote, The Path to Passive. I estimate there are about 1,000 passive solar homes being built. And I thought, well, Bing, you've done your good works, and now you can kind of rest on your laurels a bit and start focusing on other things. Well, it turns out the United States and the rest of the country kind of fell asleep. Everything is back to hunky-dory, and we have a thriving economy. Canada took the lead in passive solar energy research, and then Germany, in turn, has taken the lead over Canada. And then the last thing I want to mention is England, the United Kingdom, plans to have its entire electrical load supplied by renewables by the year 2030. So when I saw this, I said, there are some countries which are taking this really seriously. So talking about energy, most of our energy comes from fossil fuels and burning them. And the question becomes, the two byproducts are carbon dioxide and heat. Heat is normally nice, particularly in a climate like Nebraska, particularly now as it's getting cold. But the question that I pose my students, and they usually get really varying answers, is how long do you think that it takes for the heat of one Hiroshima atomic bomb to be released into the oceans? And so I will ask this audience, many of you are, of course, educated or already are more than familiar with what the answer should be, but just take a stab. How many of you think it's going to take a year to put the amount of heat of one Hiroshima bomb into the ocean? Anybody? 1 month?
1 month.
Okay, thank you. We have one taker for 1 month. Anybody for 1 week? Nobody. Oh, one. Okay, thank you, Sonia. 1 week. Anybody? Don't see too many hands. And now I think people perhaps are being a little shy. That's all right. How about 1 day?
I'll go with 1 day, Bing.
Okay, very good. Good for you. 1 hour.
1 hour.
Okay. 1 second.
1 second.
Who said 1 second?
Rich.
Okay. Well,
Betty.
that's pretty good. So the answer to that is on the next slide. 5 atom bombs, the equivalent heat per second, is going into our oceans right now. That means something in the neighborhood of 3.6 billion Hiroshima bombs. Their equivalent heat has been released into the oceans over the last 30 years. And so there's some questions. What has the temperature raised in the oceans? And it is 0.135 degrees, which may not appear to be a great deal. But of course, this is distributed over an entire ocean with an average depth of nearly, I think, 16,000, 17,000 feet. Well, the question I have next is this sustainable? And what is the Earth's carrying capacity? And then from the earlier slide on the methylate slushies, do really want this slush to come out of solution. So any of you living in California, I know one at least, may have some concern because off the coast of San Clemente, if you happen to take a whale boat to watch the whales going up and down the coast, you may notice some bubbling starting to occur outside of the coastlines along Santa Cruz. That bubbling is methane. And there was a demonstration recently of a person taking a lighted tapir and lighting the air off the California coast. I would say that what was mildly interesting to me in 1967 has now causing me a certain degree of alarm. I'm not going to spend much time on this slide. I just want you to understand that climate change, it is occurring. They indicate that energy is one of its causes. I would say it is a primary driver of climate change on this planet. And either we begin to reduce its impact or face the consequences. One other thing here that is not frequently talked about is what I call heat capacity. Air has a heat capacity, about 1/20th that of water. It takes a lot less energy to heat up the air than it does to heat up water. And this is something that I use in my solar research projects, but just keep in mind the rising temperatures have a direct correlation to energy use. And energy use results in carbon dioxide. I show this because I think that we have to understand, I've heard people claiming that these are all part of the natural cycles of life. And I wanted to say that I don't agree with this. Frankly, the natural portion is running along here in the green, and the human and natural drivers together, it's mainly the human part of it that is contributing to temperature rise today. And you can see where we're at. We are approaching 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Fahrenheit. The magic number is 3C. And I think that that's for a lot of climate modelers. It appears that there's a good portion of the world, 1/5 of the world's population, has already seen 1.5 degree rise. So let's talk about energy past, present, and future. The past, largely fueled by the Industrial Revolution. And that's why I included the quote by William Blake, because the steam engine and the electric motor did a great deal to reduce the suffering of people living during those medieval times coming into the industrial age. The idea of mass production was a byproduct and a dream of the members of the Lunar Society, of which our Benjamin Franklin happened to be a contributing member, interestingly enough. The look at the contributions from the various sources. Coal was supplanted in the just after 1930 or 40 by the discovery of oil in Pennsylvania in 1880, and it has taken a larger role. Natural gas, these three, blue, red, and black, constitutes the major portion of our energy diet today. Nuclear and renewable and hydro and biomass contribute a fraction and do not yet equal coal's energy production. Primary energy consumption by sector, by again, by the various sources. This is somewhat of a repetition, but I wanted to show hydro does play a role, and wind is gaining is gaining as well as photovoltaic. So we will look at some of the renewables later on in the talk. In terms of, I wanted to show the U.S. energy consumption by sector, electricity, transportation, industrial, and residential. In terms of quads of energy, this comes out to about 100 quads. When I first started getting introduced to this, the U.S. load was 68 quads back in the 1970s. We have increased our energy diet considerably since that period. But I want you to see, each of these sectors are important in terms of looking at the overall solution. What can we replace fossil fuels with in the industrial sector, the transportation sector, and in terms of residential? And realizing that most of the electricity is produced by fossil fuels. Some of the pathways being predicted from this year, 2021 onwards, depending on the International Energy Association or the IPCC group or the IRENA group, even OPEC contributes to this. That's why I call it uncertain energy future. I don't know what the path will be, but I hope it's not this dotted red line, which would be in terms of quadrillion BTUs, which to me, it would probably not be a good result for us. None of the others are really great either, except for one which shows a decrease in the total quads of energy BTUs that are being consumed. And where is it coming from? Mainly electrical. I wanted to pull out the world's total electrical consumption, and I found the one for 2018. Where does most of our electricity come from? So I understand the desire to get to electric cars. You're not burning gasoline. The problem is, where is your energy coming from that comes down the power lines? 3 and 61 means nearly 2/3 of the electrical energy is generated by fossil fuels. And 26.7, well, 26,700 terawatt hours of energy divided into these various sources. So again, this is a reference point for you to understand, yes, I love electric vehicles, but if we don't do something about how that electricity comes down the lines and all the attendant problems with it, and the fact that we're going to have to completely redo the grids, not as easy as one thinks. I do want to talk about population. You'll remember the Isley quote that the population growth and energy growth have basically been one unending impulse function. Well, here's the impulse function. Where is this going to go? What is the world's carrying capacity? And there is a correlation between population and energy consumed, although the 10% of the richest peoples consume approximately 80 to 90% of the world's global energy. So there is an inequitable distribution of energy around the world. And why underdeveloped nations will say, and point a finger, it's easy for you to say, you developed nations, rich nations, telling us to control how much carbon dioxide we release. Well, as you can see here, that population is unabated. And where will most of the population growth come from as we look into the 21st century? It's going to come from the area which has the most underserved populations. So what do we need to do between now and 2030? Mike asked me to talk a little bit about what can we do between now and 2030. And here's some ideas I put together. In my area, mandating building energy practice to at least match that of the Germans, which in essence, in a northern climate means R50 sidewalls, R100 roofs. In Omaha, there will be one building that will meet the German standards of 2050 right now. And it turns out incentivize, pressure, or shut down the worst utilities and industrial companies who happen to be responsible for 2/3 of the historical greenhouse emissions. 90 companies are responsible for 2/3 of the historical greenhouse emissions. And you can guess leading among them is ExxonMobil. They, by the way, wish to increase their carbon dioxide output by 17% between now and 2025. I think maybe this is something that ratepayers, stockholders might want to try to induce a change in attitude about this request. Having all transportation systems switch to electric and hydrogen, is that possible? I believe that switching completely is not likely, but the intention to switch, as Mercedes-Benz has now announced, that all their cars as of 2030, and I believe Volvo as well, will be electrical. The new Lucid electric car has a range of 520 miles. So its recharge time is quite rapid, quite extensive. All power plants, if they're not renewable, permits should be highly restrictive for those that are coal. The unfortunate thing, and I do point out China as a culprit in this scenario, is that the Chinese are at the current rate producing one coal-fired plant per month, generating capacity. They are not reducing their coal dependence because they can't meet their demands. China, on the other side, happens to be the world's largest producer of wind and PV systems. So on one hand, they are the bad guys, and I mean really bad, because not only are they building one coal-fired plant for domestic production, but they're also shipping one coal-fired plant every so often to other nations around the world, specifically along the Pacific Rim. Then we need to begin to start thinking about our population. It cannot be allowed to continue without restraints or constraints. This isn't going to work in the long term. Talking about how we interact with the green world around us, I recently reread E.F. Schumacher's book on Small is Beautiful. And he is an economist from half a century ago who said that we are not including the cost of energy and free water in our estimates, economic models for shipping food, building materials, and everything else. And so he proposed local self-support. And I think I saw a recent article about an English community which is turning into an international movement where they take public spaces and grow vegetables which are available for free distribution to anybody who's interested. The desertification of the earth is a serious issue. And even on farms, you don't have to take out all the trees. You can ring properties with trees. And the idea that a tree and trees would have a significant impact, a natural solution to carbon dioxide, is one that I think is worth considering. It would require an area the size of the United States. And I have a good friend who knows E.O. Wilson, and E.O. Wilson's book is my required book in sustainability, who proposes that half the earth be unused, and that currently 10 to 15% of the earth's entire surface is used for urban use, and that returning some of it back to nature is not that really challenging an issue. So the third item is sequestering 20 gigatons of carbon dioxide. And that's just trying to reach net zero in terms of the excess carbon dioxide each year, assuming that the earth continues to absorb the carbon dioxide that we are producing, which is in excess of 40 gigatons a year. Well, the sequestration techniques on an industrial scale, I think, are worth interesting, and I have seen a number of interesting solutions. Some of you have probably heard of Climeworks in Iceland. Iceland is also one of the largest producers of geothermal energy for its power plants, and we'll talk about that also in the future. And then preventing ocean mining allowing to occur has just happened. And again, looking at those nodules that I saw in 1967, I'm thinking, I know there are a number of companies that are racing, particularly in the Pacific Ocean, to try to begin mining as soon as possible, so that before environmental laws are passed to prevent that, that they can go ahead and get started. The Amazon forest, for those of you that might be interested, when I was in college, I said, well, that's our natural sink for carbon dioxide. I have been reading lately that the Amazon is now a net producer of carbon dioxide because so much of it has been deforested. That is very disturbing for me to hear, particularly the president of a country telling the rest of the world to go jump off the closest cliff. How dare we, the rest of the world, tell Brazil that their use of the Amazon forest is hurting the rest of the world. There has to be a better dialogue, I believe, between nations.
Oh, Bing, excuse me for interrupting, but it's about 12:41. Okay. So maybe see if you can wind it up maybe in the next 7 minutes or so.
Will do. So solutions, solutions that work now are the Bullet Building in Seattle. It is net zero in terms of water and energy. Home use, most of it goes for heating, cooling, and water heating. And here's a solution that we are working on here in Omaha. On the right, you see the sustainable small house, which was inspired by California, which is now under construction. And this building will basically use the heat from 16 birthday candles to keep it warm, generate all its own electricity, and also store all its own water from rainwater. These are two friends of mine. If people are wondering, this is going to be difficult to do, German standards already met by the Dagenfords in North Omaha. Their house is net zero and will be net water zero as well shortly. This is Senator Don Preister's home in South Omaha. He is net zero with his electric car, and he does not have any garbage. The garbage people do not stop at his home because he's totally self-sustainable. Hydrogen. I was asked to speak about hydrogen. There are various versions of it. When people talk about hydrogen vehicles, just be aware that most hydrogen comes from fossil fuels today. Yes, you can have green hydrogen, but that is not a major producer of hydrogen today. And this is what green hydrogen would look like as an example. And you're using electrolysis to get it to happen. Hydrogen vehicles are something that I think are not yet effective in terms of the efficiency of the overall system for the amount of energy you put in and what you get out into a hydrogen car is limited to about 14%. Hydrogen planes. Yes, I believe it has a future, not probably in the next 5 to 6 years. And you can see the Boeing hydrogen test aircraft being tested. If they will have to be wide body jets with hydrogen tanks built onto them, probably better if they're cryogenic, so you have a greater energy storage. The Germans are far ahead of us. This is their hydrogen-powered commuter train in northern Germany, undergoing testing today and in commercial use. This is a wind-powered and hydrogen-powered catamaran, which will lead to this: ocean freighters that are wind-powered and hydrogen-powered. And this design is already being considered. Battery technology is going to improve, and I'm not going to spend any time talking about this, but that's an area of interest for me. The ability to increase the energy per watt is improving rapidly. So I expect major movements to be happening in the battery storage technology, particularly at grid level, which is one of the problems of large-scale wind and PV projects. What do you do at night? Okay, so now looking downwind at various technologies, can we begin to do some of these things that are here? I believe the first 3 or 4 are definitely doable in a very short period of time, and I'm going to talk about some of them now. Fusion, I kind of thought was a pipe dream. Now I'm taking it more seriously. I look at the number of startup companies in fusion. They exceed 30 now. The other thing in my field, this number 20 Tesla tells me this is for real. And being able to contain a 100 million degree plasma, I think, is within the realm of possibility as a result of this work. This is one company, Commonwealth Fusion Systems at MIT. The ITER project in France, you're interested in the Q, you get more energy than what you put in, and the expected output of the ITER project is approximately 500 megawatts for a 50 megawatt input. Yes, I think for now I am taking fusion a lot more seriously. Bucky Fuller, my hometown, New York City, proposed a Fuller Dome over mid-Manhattan. Is this worth considering? Yes, I do think it's worth considering now, because this is what's happening. In China, they are talking about an animal utopia. And on the right side, Google, one of our $1 trillion companies, is seriously thinking about new headquarters, which would involve dome construction. Full conversion. Can we reach, you'll remember from the earlier part, this was all fossil fuels. Can we make the fossil fuels a smaller component? Yes, I am optimistic we can, if we make the correct choices today. And that is to go with looking at various renewable solutions. I do believe wind is a pretty powerful resource. Nebraska happens to be, as one of my friends mentioned to me from the Union of Concerned Scientists, could become the Saudi Arabia of wind energy. And it turns out he actually was pretty correct on that. Photovoltaics is another area that is growing very rapidly, particularly in Nebraska, near the Lincoln area. Can it grow fast enough? This whole output needs to be increased by a factor of anything from 3 to 10 from present levels for us to meet the 2050 goals. Covering ponds and canals with PV, I think, are viable solutions to prevent evaporation. This is particularly true of the canal systems in California. I think you could reduce the evaporation by 60, 70% by covering the canals with PV arrays. Geothermal is a hot area, no pun intended. I happen to think that the Omaha company, California Energy, got out of this industry too early. And here are the areas of the world which show potential geothermal to electricity sites. It is cost effective now. It doesn't need subsidies. It doesn't need any government support. It is already competitive. Ocean wave power, basically up and down action. Use the up and down action of waves to pump water. Use that pumped water to drive generators. Simple solution. We actually have almost a gigawatt of power, and here's some drawings of how it might look. And here's an example in La Rance in France. It's 240 megawatts of power. The Koreans are doing it, and now the English are getting ready to put in a plant in Swansea, England, beginning in 2023. Nebraska. A friend from Union of Concerned Scientists once said, you know, Bing, if you were to get rid of the grass growing on Nebraska and replace it with switchgrass, you would have enough grass there along its 455-mile length to meet your entire electrical demand. I said, you're kidding me, Donald. He said, yes, believe me. And so I went and did to put my own friend to those figures. And I said, darn, he's right. That this is how it would work, one of the ways. And it turns out 10 states could provide nearly 20% of the entire US energy production. Now, I'm just going to take a couple minutes here at the end, if Mike will allow me, and that is going beyond the pale. This is a part of the course I love with my renewables and sustainability class and my technology, science, and civilization class. Let's start thinking completely out of the box and dream. And so there are two people that I particularly admired as a child, Arthur C. Clarke and Gerard O'Neill of Princeton University. This is Gerard O'Neill's idea when he came to talk here at the University of Nebraska, was for L5 space colonies. And I thought, well, that's pretty far out. And it's a popular theme in science fiction. Well, as it turns out, the use of robot mined materials on the moon with mass drivers to deliver to L5 points is today not all that far-fetched. We use the mass driver approach to power our many of our trains now. Maglev, it's called. And then the idea of spaceborne solar satellites beaming energy back to the Earth is something I have seen articles now in my journals, IEEE Spectrum magazine. And the idea is proposed by Gerard O'Neill. Let's generate the Earth's entire load, beam that energy into about a 20, 30 square mile area on Earth in an unused portion of the Earth, and use that energy to distribute to meet the needs of the entire population of this planet. It's actually, in a way, part of a Dyson sphere, but that's for science fiction people. And so unfurling this is something that I think the concept of Z is interesting. I'm sorry I don't have enough time to really fully vet this subject with you all, but I think the interesting thing is the Chinese have already said that they're going to build a 2 gigawatt unit by the year 2050. And if the Chinese go in this direction, they will probably incentivize the United States to say, we're going to do you one better than this. So thank goodness the Chinese have already made this commitment. And then this is the last thing that I'm going to be giving to my freshman class this year. And that is, what would it take to mine the materials off of 16 Psyche, which is an asteroid, which NASA is going to visit, by the way, next year. The value estimated, if it is truly metallic, is is staggering. And I think we can understand why Elon Musk and SpaceX is going into space. I think it goes beyond Mars, frankly. It's the potential value of being able to mine some of these asteroids. And yes, some of the technology might be very costly and expensive, and that's something that's the fun part of engineering. I'm going to ask a couple of my mining engineering friends. This is already a study by NASA for the Office of Science and Technology. I think it's getting serious, folks. And why? Well, I think when we are able to start thinking about these ideas, Arthur C. Clarke wrote a book that I read as a kid called Fountains of Paradise. And I thought, pretty far out, until I started thinking, what about the engineering behind it? And what about not having to burn fossil fuels to get into space if you could just take an elevator ride up to the top? And the fact that we now have stranded cables capable of supporting this kind of weight, and you can see over here a counterweight, so it's not going to fall back to Earth. I'm thinking, wow, this would be something interesting, particularly with some of the science fiction movies we've seen recently. So let's assume we don't do any of this. And this is my next to last slide. And I come back to Lauren Isley again. I've had many conversations with Ray Bradbury, and this is one of those conversations that we had just before he passed. And I talked to him about this. And it's taken from his Invisible Pyramid. And I wanted to share it with you. If we as a species do not choose to make these decisions, then Isley, as a modern shaman, has this warning for us. And I'll let you read it. It's not an ending that I would choose for us. I don't think it's an ending that any of us would choose for us. And yes, there's a certain amount of pessimism involved with this, but I think there is an anxiety starting to grow in the human populations regarding what are we doing to ourselves? What are we doing to this planet? Is our tenure on Earth threatened by our increasing numbers and by what we have done to the planet? And I think Isley says it very poetically. The young man from Lincoln, Nebraska, and I will close with this. Today, man's mounting numbers and his technological power to pollute his environment reveal a single demanding necessity: the necessity for him to consciously to re-enter into the sunflower forest from which he first arose. Man must be his own last magician. He must seek his own way home. And so in his book, The Invisible Pyramid, Isley is asking the question, what have we done as a species? What are we in the process of doing? And what do we have to do in order to survive and thrive as a species? And so I will, this is the book that Ray Bradbury was kind enough to write the foreword to. It's a Lauren Isley reader, which is available in every public library in Nebraska and every public school in Nebraska. And the idea that Ray really pushed on me, Bing, it's time to get Isley's word back into the state and into the consciousness of people everywhere. Isley was an icon in the 60s during the unrest that occurred, although he really didn't want to be the sponsor of that. His words were very popular in both Berkeley and Harvard. And so Ray was saying, Bing, it's time for Isley to be rediscovered. So with that, I wanted to close with an Isley quote. And he actually is leaving it up to us to decide what actions we would choose going forward. I tend to be a little more of an optimist as well as a realist, simply because I have four kids, and I would like them to have some kind of future. But we shall see. Time will tell us what will happen. Okay, so with that, I guess we'll make things open for any discussion or questions or comments that any of you might have.
Thank you very much, Bing. That was eye-opening and very provocative. There are a number of questions. Many of them revolve around the use of novel materials for fuel. One is, a couple of them that are mentioned is utilizing thorium, the element thorium, and another is a Japanese technique of using a plant called euglena as a fuel source.
I'm not familiar with that. What is it called, Mike?
EUGLENA, euglena. And the other is element thorium.
Yes, well, thorium is pretty obvious. It's a low-grade version of uranium, and China is actually going to build a thorium plant. So the Chinese have already stolen the thunder, and they're going to build a thorium-based nuclear plant now.
Okay, let's see. Magnetic-based energy. You did mention about levitation trains. Any other use of magnetic potential energy in the future?
I assume that's in terms of magnetic confinement is what they're talking about. When you're talking about magnets, it's
Right.
to control plasmas. And the MIT companies and the California companies are all using slightly different geometric arrangements of their magnetic bottles. It's kind of like a hot water bottle. You wanted to control hot fluids. Well, you use a magnet for the same reason. But a magnet by itself will produce electrical energy if you spin it, and that's how the electric generators came into being. So I don't know which one they're referring to. Either the magnet is a source of energy or the magnet to contain plasma energy.
Okay, thank you. Another question is about new advanced nuclear SMRs.
And what do they want to ask?
When will we start seeing them emerge as an energy source?
Well, I think we're going to see if the fusion hits break even within this decade, which I think it might. There's a chance that we're going to hit break even with fusion. My guess is that fusion will be the nuclear source of choice. The other ones, breeder reactors, which the French are using, have an inherent instability associated with them. To air is human, to air on a nuclear plant is disastrous. So I think anything that would depart too far from a fusion approach is something that I would be very careful before I would proceed with it any further. Then you have the other issue of what do you do with your nuclear waste? And all you have to do is say, I'm interested in retiring to Hanford, Washington, and then move up there and look at the polluted grounds at Hanford. The EPA has given up on cleaning it up. It's just too costly. And it was a place where our nuclear materials were being processed and disposed of. Nebraska withdrew from the nuclear waste agreement. They rather pay the millions of dollars they had to pay in penalties because they didn't want that waste in our caves. So there's a reason for that. It's not storable over the thousands of years. Twice the loss of the mastodons. That's how long the half-life of waste.
Did you do that yourself?
Huh?
Did you do it yourself?
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Good job, man.
Okay, we're now out of time, but I want to thank you, Bing, for an excellent, fascinating presentation. And thanks to all the folks from the Bread Breakers group and the NEWAC community for joining us today. We
Thank you.
have recorded this and we will be posting it on our Nebraska World Affairs YouTube channel in the next couple of days. And I encourage you to check out our Facebook and Instagram sites for keeping up on future events like this. So thanks again, Bing. I really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you all at the next event.
My pleasure. And if anybody has more questions they'd like to ask me, I'm willing to stay on board longer than the 1 hour session. So I'm happy to just stay on and visit with people to give you a chance to fully.
Thank you, Bing, I want to thank you also for doing this presentation. It's very excellent, and I'm sure that I hope the audience, will pick up on this and maybe do something about it for the future generation. Thank you again.
You bet. And I see Seth Rifkin has a wind turbine behind him. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that, Seth.
Certainly. Well, first of all, Bing, thank you very much for a very comprehensive presentation, probably the most comprehensive I've sat through on every sort of energy generation in a very long time. I'm personally involved in, my companies develop utility-sized wind and solar here in the state of Texas. And we have more wind turbines installed here than almost any other country in the world other than Spain, China, and Germany. We've been able to lower our cost of generation per kilowatt into very low numbers, significantly lower than fossil fuel. And we're hoping to lead the way for other states like Nebraska to be able to utilize solar and wind and storage in ways that will reduce the carbon footprints. And all it takes is working hard to get the utilities who control the different ISOs to open their doors more for wind and solar to be able to bring our message and our low-cost generation to the consumers of the states.
Yeah, Texas is one of the great leaders in this country in terms of renewable energy. So I applaud the state of Texas for taking a lead in this area. Iowa is another state which actually there were a couple of days last year, Seth, that Iowa got its entire electrical load from wind. So and that is interesting that these two states have done as much. Nebraska is very late to the game, but they are going to approach 1 gigawatt pretty soon. I think they're over 700 now, 700 megawatts, and it's growing. I don't know how popular PV might be in Texas, but I'm beginning to see a good mix of PV and wind in this state. And in fact, our local utility is thinking about a 1,000 acre PV farm on the western edge in Sarpy County. And we've been thinking about when 2019, we had a really major flood here. And so here we had a problem of too much water. And the flooding rate was nearly 50,000 cubic feet per second in this state, which exceeds the entire flow of the Missouri River. And so I tasked my students, let's prevent the next Nebraska flood. And so students came up with, I thought, pretty brilliant solutions. Basically, let's look at pumped hydro systems. So Nebraska is not known for its high hills, but there are some places that are several hundred feet higher than others. And we started looking at single solutions using our local utilities PV grid to power the pumps that would be necessary. And the students identified pumps from the Hurricane Katrina that hit New Orleans. And they started doing the engineering behind it to say, what can we do with this? And I thought, pretty clever solutions that they came up with, Seth, using the renewable energy, including wind in this state, during the daytime in particular, to power the pumps, to start pumping the water in March from the Platte River up to the holding reservoirs, so that you would be able to store that away temporarily. And then during the summer months, you would have basically a major recreational resource, which we don't have. And then in the afternoon and evening, we now have a backup power source to power recharge all the electric vehicles and air conditioners going on in our metropolitan area. So I thought the students were brilliant in coming up with these solutions. And so it's always fun to give students a real world project to work on and to see them really embrace it with, I call it, manic interest and enthusiasm. And so I'm always trying to give them things that will intrigue them and stimulate their imaginations and thought processes. So where in Texas do you live?
I live in Houston. Our corporate offices are in Plano. Our projects are all in West and North Texas. And
Wonderful.
Speaking of students and their growth, I think one of the things that I'm seeing is brilliant new ideas in terms of energy storage. Both with, I know someone mentioned magnets. We're looking at some mechanical storage that is pretty intriguing, as well as that's coming out of Rice University here in Houston. We're looking at where you look like a lot of there are a number of companies here that are utilizing compressed air and salt domes that we have a lot of here in Texas. We up in our projects are all up in the Great Plains where it's very flat. So pumped hydro is a little more difficult, but compressed air and salt domes is something that bears looking at. And I'm very optimistic about what is coming in terms of storage. I mean, we're fortunate here with the wind machines. Our capacity factors are approaching 50%, and that allows us to generate power pretty much all times, all throughout the day. And we're building projects where we're co-locating solar that and adding a little bit of storage that's starting to look like a base load, pretty close to a base load generation capacity, which is I think where we're all heading in the future.
Yes, I had the pleasure of having my dinner with Andre event with a colleague at the University of Colorado, Frank Barnes, and he wanted to go over a paper he had written about a decade ago, and so over a Chinese dinner that lasted 3 hours, he went over each one of those solutions. He said, Bing, we're going to have an excess of renewable energy coming within the next decade. I've come up with a number of ideas which I wanted to share with you on how are we going to store the energy when we don't need to use it. And so over the course of this long dinner, he went over every one of his solutions, and I thought, my goodness, interesting for an engineer who's not mechanical, but he was just thinking about things. And I thought that is one of those magical periods that you really enjoy spending with people who are creative and thoughtful. And he and I have been very good friends for 15 years. And so I think there are some very generous people who are thoughtful about looking at the various renewable solutions. And I think if we all have this sense, we have a common purpose, and that is to preserve the future for our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And this is, to me, a very common cause that we all need to be part of. And this generation, as I challenge my students, your generation will have to make the crucial decisions. You cannot let this slide by. Either you will do this or we will hit that 3 degrees Celsius break point. And if we reach that, I do not know how quickly the tundra in the Arctic will melt, releasing all the methanes that are contained in them in their slush. And the impact of methane on the global climate is a factor, many times that more than that of carbon dioxide. And we're so worried about the fossil fuels that we're burning, we're neglecting the fossil fuels that are contained in our very ground and seabeds. And if they turn into carbon providers, heaven help us all. That is there beyond anything that I can imagine. So it's just something that occurred to me in 1967. And now it's become something that is a lot more serious I think that needs to be acted on. I
Couldn't agree more, Professor.
Bing, just a quick housekeeping note. Your answers are very great. If you stop sharing the screen, we can see more of the people who are asking the questions. Great.
Bing, I have a question about biomass fuels. Does the burning of biomass fuels release CO2?
Yes, it does. The pyrolysis technique, actually, you also create what's called biochar, which can be impregnated back into the ground. But the burning approach will produce carbon dioxide.
So is that considered a clean fuel?
Not really, but it's, you might say, neutral, because you're growing the switchgrass, which absorbs that carbon dioxide for the next burning.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're pumping it out of the ground like oil or natural gas.
I recently read an article about soil, using the soil, planting and rotating the crops differently, that can help reduce carbon dioxide in the air. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, well, that's a, normally, number one, the types of crops that we plant. Some plants have very deep roots, and once you crop the plants, is it necessary to rip them out of the ground, for instance? Or can you just leave the plant there and just take the parts that you really need immediately and leave the roots where they are so that you have less soil erosion? That is the amount of soil that we erode into our stream beds and eventually into the ocean is pretty incredible. And the idea is to reduce the amount of erosion. I've seen ideas of if you take a typical farm, many farms already have these hedgerows of plants along the northern edge of the houses. And that is to say, well, perhaps you can do that along the property lines as well, so that you have less blowing of your precious soil, where it can be trapped by the trees, your hedges, your trees, and to create a windbreak around your entire properties. Does the entire 160-acre farm need to be all plowed under? And there's a question whether that is necessary in order to extract the maximum amount of produce that you can have. I think another question is, in this state, there is a high degree of ethanol interest. And I have mixed feelings about that. I understand you're trying to create an industry and have fuel from that. But again, you're burning it. And as Michael has said, is that a problem? And the answer is yes, you're burning it. The advantage is you didn't pull it out of the ground. So yes, everything where you can grow and reintroduce trees, could we, if every farmer, if every homeowner, if I look at my property, some of my friends who have been here know that on 2/3 of an acre, I have about 60 trees. Most of them are pine trees, because I want them producing oxygen all year round. And a transatlantic flight, basically that will take approximately, let's say, 6 trees, 500 years to absorb that level of carbon dioxide. So when I think about Greta Thunberg, she took a sailboat to address the UN across the Atlantic. Can we reduce the number of flights that we take? And I would say, yeah, I really need to take that flight before I will take it now. And that's tough to do, but I realize I'm very fortunate. We are all very fortunate to be living in these United States of America. We are among the elite. And so we're all riding in first class here, whether or not we think we are. And I think that when I reflect on this, I think Greta has kind of made me think, well, Bing, do you really need to take that flight to that conference, or do you just show up via Zoom? And I thought, I'm now leaning towards Bing, just show up via Zoom. I loved going to Perth, Australia, and going to Sydney and Paris and London. They're wonderful trips, but did I really need to do that? Or was it just mainly for my own ego purposes? And so now that COVID has hit us, I'm feeling more and more comfortable with Zoom, although the beginning of this talk, I was fumbling around again, as usual, being absent-minded. But I think, yeah, I think that that's true. I think anybody have anything else they'd like to ask or contribute or comment on? I see
I'm a meeting at Bethel.
I'm sorry?
Oh, that's a private conversation.
I'm a meeting at
Steve,
Bethel.
you got to
Okay,
mute
see ya.
yourself. Or Vicky, mute him. You can't. Okay.
So, delighted to meet you. Do you know Alex Grossman?
Yes.
So Alex and his wife are dear friends, and I just don't see them often enough. Alex has always been one of my favorite students that I've had. He's a delightful individual to talk to, and I watched him first get married.
Right. Recently, too.
And now they're all grown up, and I'm just, and I haven't seen Alex in maybe 5 years now. And so every once in a while, he'll say, Bing, come on out to the J and visit with me and my wife, and maybe we can have a meal out here or something. And I said, sure. So I'm looking forward to seeing Alex again, but if you see him before I do,
I will be happy to pass your greetings on.
and my warmest wishes to him and his family, because I kind of don't know what his sons are doing right now. So of course he's got the father's pride and
Of course.
in their accomplishments. And I see, I see my brother has tuned in. So I wish him well. So Betty,
Well,
it turns out 2 of my relatives came on. One a cousin who's a professor at I think Cal State Fullerton. I think that's the name of the school, and my brother in LA, Austin, is here as well. So thank you. My cousin's turned off, but thank my brother for showing up.
Well, speaking on behalf of Bread Breakers and maybe stepping in for Michael, we appreciate the time you've given us. You've gone over an extra to our great appreciation. And we hope that you have a wonderful afternoon, and thank all of you who took the time to attend our programs. So thank you.
Our pleasure. Delighted to meet you, Gary.
Likewise, Bing. I come on to the campus office, so perhaps we will have a chance to meet in person.
Yes, I look forward to that. So
All right, very good. Good afternoon to everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you all.
everybody.
Bye.
Great
Thank
group,
you.
great
Thank
group
you,
and great
Bing.
questions.
Okay.
Okay, you could just, the leave button is in the lower right-hand corner. Thank you all.
All the best, everyone.
Bye, Gary.
Bye.
Bye. Bye,
Thanks
Betty.
again, Bing.
My pleasure, Mike.